Hello, thanks for joining me on this first day of 2021. I'm Black History Maven Kalela Williams, and let's explore a couple of questions today. Was the real Queen Charlotte Black as portrayed in the Netflix series Bridgerton, and why does it matter? In Netflix's binge-worthy series Bridgerton, showrunner Shonda Rhimes detours from the romance novels the show is based on to feature multiracial characters, including the velvet-coated and velvet-eyed Duke of Hastings, a fictional character, but the character of Queen Charlotte was 100% a real person. There was a Queen Charlotte married to King George III of Madness and Hamilton fame, and the television series Bridgerton portrays her as Black. But how much of this story is true? First, let's look at what all the history books tell us. Queen Charlotte was born in 1744, the daughter of Karl Ludwig Friedrich Mecklenburg-Strelitz and Princess Elizabeth Albertine Saxe-Hildburghausen. I always like to say these in a fake sort of British accent, whatever that is, because that's how I imagine it, like they're being announced at a ball. In 1761, at age 17, this German princess traveled to England, marrying King George III 6 hours after meeting him, a whirlwind courtship for sure. Through the course of her marriage to King George, she had 15 children, all but 3 surviving to adulthood. Many of her married years seemed to be happy ones. Like her husband, the queen was a fan of music. She indeed was a patron of Mozart, and she indeed did sing an aria with him, accompanied by him, as mentioned in the film. She had an interest in botany, and the education and conditions of women and children were important to her. But her marriage became strained for reasons that would challenge any couple. King George III suffered his first bout of mental illness in 1765, but Charlotte was kept unaware. His illness returned severely in the late 1780s, which left Queen Charlotte fearful and hopeless, according to some contemporaries. She refused to be left alone with him. The king and queen spent much of the rest of their married lives apart, and Charlotte's temper changed too. She was moody and no longer as interested in public events. And Queen Charlotte found herself coping with the death of a close friend. Although she never met Marie Antoinette, she and the French queen were long-distance friends. When she learned that the French queen might be executed, she prepared apartments to greet the royal family and to protect them. And Queen Charlotte was distraught, of course, upon learning of Marie Antoinette's and her husband's deaths. Queen Charlotte's own popularity waned, however, and when she died in 1818, the king, who suffered greatly, was unaware that she was gone. Yet, we see hints of Queen Charlotte's life today. The city of Charlotte, North Carolina, called the Queen City, was named after her. Charlottesville, Virginia, of white supremacist tiki torch fame, is also named for her. You might also recall that Charlottesville is the college town of the University of Virginia, founded by Thomas Jefferson. And like 4 of Thomas Jefferson's children, Queen Charlotte might have indeed had Black ancestry. Historian Mario de Valdez-Cacum certainly thinks so. Valdez has studied Queen Charlotte's images, and although some historians argue that it's hard to pin down fully what a person looked like from their 18th century portraits, because artists were notorious for playing up or playing down certain features, Charlotte's portraits by Sir Allan Ramsay, pictured here, certainly seem to show the face of a woman with African ancestry, says Valdez. Ramsay was an ardent abolitionist, it should be noted. Now here's a portrait by Ramsay. Here's a close-up of it. Another portrait's also created by Ramsay. What do you think? Now, we must remember, of course, Charlotte had scads of portraits and sketches done. Here she is, pictured by other contemporary artists. But Valdez has also researched what contemporaries wrote, often derogatorily, about Queen Charlotte. She was ill-colored, said Sir Walter Scott, while a prime minister critiqued her nose is too wide and her lips are too thick. She was small and crooked with a true mulatto face, according to a royal physician. Valdez has traced Queen Charlotte to be the descendant of Alfonso III, a 9th century Spanish king, who Valdez says conquered a small Moorish town called Pharos and demanded the governor's daughter as his prize. The record does not show whether his daughter, sometimes called Oriana and sometimes called Madragana, consented. Likely not. As the case with so many of our Black ancestors, she had 3 children as an unwilling partner, more than likely. One of these children, Martin Alfonso, married into Portugal's royal de Sousa family, which also has Black ancestry, according to Valdez. And thus, Queen Charlotte would have inherited Black ancestry on both sides of her family tree. Many other historians don't refute that Queen Charlotte could have had African ancestry, noting it wasn't uncommon at that time, but they point out it was remote, as we can see in this family tree. After all, Martin Alfonso was Queen Charlotte's great, 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 great grandfather. But Valdez reminds us that inbreeding was real, and it was a thing. And thus, Charlotte's lineage, though long and fancy, wasn't all that deep. So African ancestry could keep showing up again and again and again and again because there simply weren't that many swimmers in the gene pool. And what we do know is that Black people have been documented as living in the UK and in Europe as a whole in small numbers since the 12th century. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the British Empire took a heavier hand in the transatlantic slave trade. In fact, the coinage of the time, called a guinea, was named after a West African region. When Africans were forced to go in large numbers to the Caribbean by London, Bristol, and Liverpool merchants, a few were brought instead to the UK by these merchants, by government officials, by planters or naval officers to work as enslaved servants in Britain. Others were offered to commanders of slaving vessels as gifts, and some enslaved people were sold at dockside auctions or coffee houses, just like what we saw in the US. Slavery was not made illegal in Britain until 1772, and even afterwards it was practiced de facto. In many cases, enslaved servants or servants of wealthy people were dressed in fancy garb and seen as decorative items. Those who managed to earn or achieve their freedom in some way were often relinquished to poverty. Intermarriage between whites and Blacks was much more common because with far more Black men than women, that amounted in more intermarriage, of course. Neighborhoods were less segregated then than they were in the US, although there is evidence that Black people managed to carve out their own spaces in the UK. A 1764 newspaper describes how 57 Black men and women ate, drank, and entertained themselves with dancing and music at a public house on Fleet Street. Everyone, said the article, including the performers, were Black. And some Black people became celebrated in England. Olaudah Equiano was enslaved, but went on to become an abolitionist, an author, and an explorer. Ignatius Sancho was born on a slave ship, but became an author, a shopkeeper, and he was invited into celebrated literary circles. And this portrait, painted by Alan Ramsey, the portraitist of Queen Charlotte, is thought to be either Sancho or Equiano, more than likely Sancho. And of course, Phyllis Wheatley, an African woman living in the United States, traveled to England to publish her book under the patronage of a noblewoman in the UK. An audience with the king and possibly the queen was arranged, but it was canceled because Phyllis Wheatley had to return to Boston earlier than anticipated. But it's very possible that Queen Charlotte knew about this celebrated African poet. And regardless of Queen Charlotte's ancestry, we don't know how she felt or how she might have perceived about her known or unknown Black ancestry. It certainly doesn't seem that the real Queen Charlotte might have been fight the power. And one reason is, of course, in the station that she lived within, the idea of Black enslaved or semi-enslaved people as decorative items was familiar to her. She, in fact, might have had enslaved Africans serving in her home or semi-enslaved Africans serving in her home. This is another portrait of Queen Charlotte by another artist, and we can notice here in the corner an African servant. So with all of these complicated lineages and ideas, why does Queen Charlotte's Blackness matter? This is what other historians beyond Kukum want to know. In a recent interview, the former editor of Debrett's Essential Guide to the Peerage asked, "Who cares?" Debrett's, by the way, is a sort of encyclopedia of Britain's barons, dukes and duchesses and marquises, I don't know, whatever the plural of that is, and viscounts uncountable. And this guide includes other such handy knowledge as the knightage and the baronage, which to me is all a who cares in and of itself. So it's sort of like the pot calling the kettle, never mind. So to some Black folks, and this is why it matters, to some Black folks, the African lineage of a British queen matters when we've lived much of our lives learning that only European royalty matters. And while the royal histories of our own African ancestral homelands have been lost, with books and records obscuring, erasing, or refusing to tell it. And it matters to other Black folks who have a historical entree into a steamy British romance when we've never seen our faces in films like this. It matters because representation always does. This can be really difficult to explain to those who've never had a want to see themselves because the world around them is a mirror. I can trace much of my European ancestry back centuries, but I haven't been able to trace my African ancestry at all because the records were up to my family's enslavers to keep, and they didn't bother. So the possibility of Queen Charlotte looking Black, being Black, allows me to live a little vicariously through someone else's family tree. And it means something that maybe cities, regions, and other enduring pieces of our world have been named after a celebrated queen who may have looked a bit like my Black ancestors. Because when your history is erased, and when others say that even if it's there, it doesn't matter, it makes you feel a kind of way. Thanks so much for joining me. And let's go to the YouTubes and see if there's any questions here or any thoughts. All right. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining in. And looks like a lot of looks like a lot of people are saying that genealogy is amazing, and it truly is. It truly is, and I really wish I knew more of it. Indeed, she wasn't descended from the Spanish Moor lines, correct? And again, because in part the idea of inbreeding, the idea that royal families often, and this is of course across the board, that royal families often kept their blood within their family line. You would have had, at least Valdez thinks that you would have had the same ancestry sort of popping up over and over again. Marquest. Okay, someone gave me a plural of marquise. All right. Well, everyone, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and please share and please subscribe to my channel. We'll be having more of these shows like this, so please subscribe. Yes, the British royal family have spoken about this. To my knowledge, their latest comment was something along the lines of, "It was remote. It doesn't matter. We have more important things to focus on." And again, of course, it doesn't matter to many, many people. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great 2021. Happy New Year. Thank you.